You and I have talked about this a lot. You want to know, okay, what's point A and what's point B? That is definitely who you are. You see the end result and you find the most efficient path to get there. You've been paid very well to make that path as efficient as possible. And the problem with transitioning to something like this is it's the inefficient path that actually nets you the result. Two lifelong friends document and share their personal stories as they seek financial independence and to retire early. One reaches FIRE in 2020 during a global pandemic, inspiring the other to play catch up. This is Two Sides of FI.
If you had to define it, what does passive income generally speaking refer to?
I think of passive income as being something which doesn't require active time inputs to generate future revenues. So something that's completely divorced from time inputs. And there's a lot of narratives that are built around this, so sort of false narratives that it's like that's kind of set it and forget it thing. And so that's the ideal scenario, but obviously it takes time inputs to create the product or whatever it is that you're creating to sell on the front end. And so it's never maybe as passive as you would expect it to be. Although I think there are ways to make it sort of more passive than less. But I think the government definition, there is a standard definition that the government has for tax purposes, and that is related to rental property. So if you think of it in its most basic sense, you're earning rent from a property that you own, right? And so neither you or I do that right now.
Nope.
But that is, I think that's the sort of generative form of passive income. It's buy a piece of land and then rent it to somebody else and, receive a perpetual paycheck.
And certainly in the FIRE community, that flavor of passive income exists. And for some people, it's like their thing, right?
Totally.
They start acquiring rental units. Maybe it's even half of a duplex that they live in the beginning, and then over time they get more. And so that sort of rental idea becomes a passive income strategy for them, even post retire early.
Totally not interesting to me at all.
Yeah, me either, really. I mean, I've thought about the idea of, having a rental management company and,
really? Oh.
Then they get a cut, but I don't know. I think it's more of just like a thought, like, oh, maybe that's just kind of from a diversification strategy. But I like the idea of having, REITs and other real estate investments in my portfolio,
right,
as opposed to having hard, property ownership. That just sounds like another headache waiting to happen.
Totally. Yeah. It seems like a lot.
Maybe that's naive, but that's how I think about it.
No, and it seems like a job to me, actually. And it's also an extension of what I do for a profession right now, designing homes. So I'm always interacting with that space. And,
okay, yeah.
and
that's fair.
And I also see all the problems. So, I'm going to look at this house, this weekend, which is, I already know what it's going to look like. It's going to be dump, it's in this awesome location and it's just going to be a complete dump, and it's going to be built by somebody's uncle, hand dug the foundation or something. And, so that also kind of factors into it, that you see all the problems. And to me, there's nothing, I don't know if you just moved, so you must have had this experience, like calling subcontractors, calling contractors, trying to get work done in the house is just, it's just not something I really want to spend much more time doing. So, I, like you, paper assets are much more interesting to me in that sense. But, if we're talking about passive income, there's lots of other ways to generate passive income other than just owning property.
For people who are new to our conversation, may not be aware of kind of your trajectory, Jason's short version of that is you were an architect at traditional firms. You then started your own business doing architecture, doing residential architecture, and somehow
still do
over recent years, and still do, somehow over recent years, you transitioned to your business, meaning a whole variety of things, including passive income generation. And so how did you go from, I have a business as a residential architect, to passive income streams are now a part and a big part of how I operate?
I mean, I've talked about this a little bit in the past, but in some ways it was out of necessity, because when I first started this business, I started it in the model of every other architecture business that I've ever worked for, and that I ever knew. And that was serving clients. And when you do client service work, you're, trading time for dollars. And when you're just one person, I live in a pretty remote place, so I didn't have this dream of scaling and having a studio full of like 10 other architects who are kind of subservient to me. I had always just seen this almost as a lifestyle business. So just, designing, working to feed my family and make a good life for those around me, and just to enjoy life. And so with those goals in mind, serving clients, you can trade every single hour of your week and still not have served them correctly or properly. So one of the things about practicing as an architect is you are designing a home first, and I'm doing residential architecture. So I find a client, right? We're designing that home and it gets to a certain point, and then we have a contractor go and price it out, right? And so there's a waiting period there. So you can't just have like one job at a time. You need to have a couple of jobs at a time. And so what I found was, okay, I have one job, but need another one. So I get a second one. And then that one gets to a similar point. And let's say those lag points where you're not doing anything overlap. Well, then you have no income, right? Yeah, right. So let's pick up another one.
Sounds bad.
Right. And what happens is, I started this firm when I was 39, which sounds like, I have enough experience, 25 years experience or whatever. And it's still actually not a lot of experience in the architecture field for someone who wants to spend $3 or $4 million on a home. They look at you like you're a kid. And so what you end up doing is you end up sort of stepping back and say, do some renovation work, or you do a little bit of commercial work. And so what I did was I filled my business with this kind of stable of projects, which were on the sort of lower side of the budget, let's say less than $1 million for a house or a renovation or a commercial project. And what that means is it's a shorter time frame. So it's a smaller scope of work, shorter time frame. And so you end up you get on this hamster wheel of shorter project, finish the project, start a new one. And they're always looking for these little sort of bits of projects. And I at a certain point got to this, point of burnout where I realized this is just not the business that I really wanted for myself. And so I stepped back and said, how can I retool this? So I really enjoy working with clients and designing homes, but I don't want to do 5 of them at once. I want to do 1 at a time. And so really the passive income side of the business was born out of that need to try and make up for the income gap of the, let's say, 4 other projects that I wasn't going to take. And so I just started trying a bunch of different experiments. And really the way I approached it was, I want to take the work that I'm doing with this one client and use that work as kind of content and, turn that into interesting information that I can put out in the marketplace and try and productize it almost in a way, and it didn't happen overnight, but we're 8 years into the business now. And my goal was always to have an 80-20 split between passive revenues and active services, because I felt like the active services are always going to feed into the passive revenue. I need to have that client work in order to have the content of the passive income. Right. And now,
how long did it take you to get to that split? Did you get to it, or?
Oh yeah. And I was going to say last year was, it's probably 2 years ago I hit it. And last year it was more like 90-10.
Wow.
And those splits are, I'm not prepared to talk exact numbers, but if you just think about $100,000, right? And if you think of 20 grand of that being, related to client work. So if I have one client a year, $20,000 on, paying for a plan set or, working with a traditional client role, not much, right? That's not a lot of client work. So you can see how much actual room and the 80% accounts for a pretty significant portion of the revenue. And obviously we've scaled it quite a bit from there. But I think that's definitely the thing that's made FIRE even a consideration for me, is that I have all of these assets out in the marketplace that are working for me. It's not dissimilar to, you buying paper assets, investing in the stock market. It's just putting your money to work in a different way, or your time, I guess, in this respect, right? So yeah, it's not overnight.
Was there any kind of inspiration for that journey, or was it wholly organic? I mean, was there something you saw or read that sparked something? Like, how do you get to that point to say, that's the kind of solution that will work for me?
I think you and I both have that Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek as one of those kind of transformative books. And
for sure,
for me, I happened to read that at the right time when I was searching for solutions to the problem that I have. And I don't know if you're like this, but everything that I'm consuming in this moment is always being put through the filter of what problems I'm addressing. So, in that moment when I encountered that book, I was having problems serving clients, and it was the perfect solution for me to just start experimenting. And so there's no direct corollary for that in that book. He doesn't say, go start designing plan sets and start selling them, but it's pretty easy. I think, even now, as you and I have been talking about maybe side hustles that you're considering, it's pretty easy to take a generic idea and then put it through your own filter of, whatever profession you're in or whatever areas of expertise you have. I mean, have you thought about how you might generate passive income, or it sounds like it might be something that's interesting to you?
I have. I think I'm still in what I suspect is common, and I've asked you a little about this, but not too much. So certainly something I want to dig into a little more. I feel like I'm in the scattershot stage. Like I have this like big basket of ideas that I'm constantly chucking stuff into, that I think of while I'm taking a walk in the morning or driving in the car, like those kind of quiet times where, you're just thinking through just idea generation, right? And so I have a lot of ideas, and they're all in the exploration phase. Like nothing I think is so far along that I've made big commitments.
Because some of the stuff you've told me has been, this may be, we haven't really defined side hustle versus passive income.
I was actually going to ask about that.
Yeah. But some of those, I would slot into this kind of side hustle notion, and the ones that you've brought to me have really all dealt with trading time. And it's interesting to me because those are the ones that I came up with plenty of those too when I first started exploring this kind of passive income business. I did this way before I started the firm, but I started an Etsy shop and I started selling like hand cut paper goods, kind of strange, weird niche, right? But I was essentially selling my time, and the price that someone wants to pay for a paper cutting versus the time that it cost me to actually create the thing and then ship it out. And then if there was any damage in shipping, it goes, at a certain point, it didn't make a whole lot of sense. I was actually thinking about when I first moved to Maine and we cleared all the land around here. I took all the softwood and I cut it up and I was selling it at the road because there's a lot of, this is a vacation spot and there's a lot of campgrounds around here and people sell campwood. That's like a little cottage industry here. And I thought, I'm going to get in the middle of that value exchange. Right. And so it's like, what a bundle of wood sells for?
Not very much.
$2.50. Okay. Yeah.
Dude, a couple of those, you got a beer.
Oh my God. Right? So, but hear me out. Like, so I have this little stand at the road, right? So I put 10 bundles out there a day. Okay. If I can sell 10 bundles in a day, given where we're at, it's a lot. So you put the thing out there, right? And you got a little coffee can and it was literally a coffee can. And, in the morning you come out and check, and if you sold 10 bundles, you get $25. And most of the time what happens is you sell a few bundles and then people they don't even have 2 quarters. So they just put $2 in the thing and they take the bundle of wood anyway, or they take 2 bundles and leave $3, or, the local teenagers come and rip off the entire can, all of which happened to me. And, it's that classic, what am I doing with my time? This makes 0 sense. And if I fast forward to one of the more successful products that I made during COVID was this little add-on for this app on the iPad called Procreate. So
love Procreate.
Oh yeah. So you use it?
Yeah. For drawing. It's just great.
Yeah. It's this little sketching app. Right. And I just made this kind of little Procreate pack for architects, and there's a ton of people who want to learn how to sketch on this thing. And I just kind of made these little blueprint canvases, and I photographed a bunch of materials and things around the studio, and I have them as background. So I created this pack. I sold it for $25, and you would be shocked at how many of these things I have sold. Now, one pack for $25, it's a digital asset. I made it once and I put it up. Let's say it took me 4 or 5 hours to create that. And every time I sell one, I'm making more per hour, right? And it goes on to infinity. It's got nothing to do with trading my time, except for that one little chunk of time that I created. No hassle. I mean, I got a ton of wood around here, but I'm not trying to sell it anymore.
And those are the ideas that I'm most excited about. And that's why I haven't gone too far with anything, because to your point, I don't want to just do time for money things. As much as let me back up. I think there's a place for that, right? If you get a lot out of the engagement, like let's say a one-on-one engagement, like coaching or consulting, which you definitely do some of as well. There's certainly value to that. It's not the best dollar value per unit time.
Well, for you, it might be.
Yeah, it might be correct, because I don't have a salaried job anymore.
Yeah, right? And also I feel like your hourly rate that you can charge for the level of information that you have. Yeah. It's pretty high. So if it's someone who's in a similar position to you, you can start charging at, I don't know what you would recommend someone charges for professional services, but $600,000 an hour. I don't know. I mean, you can, that at a certain point that makes a ton of sense. And we can get into that idea about like this $25 product versus a $700 product. You got to sell a lot fewer of the $700 products to actually have it make sense. And for you, if your time is worth $1,000 an hour, I might trade that hour for $1,000. I mean, there's a certain curve there where it does make sense, right?
Well, honestly, maybe it's getting a little far ahead, but it will maybe speak to that particular question. What I find I'm doing lately is trading an hour or two of consulting a month to pay for exploration of a potential passive income generator, right? Oh. Or even a side hustle, right? Like I paid for my drone, which may or may not turn into something commercial. It's certainly entertaining on its own, or even if it just helps us with this video channel, right? I paid for that by doing a little consulting. And I'm very, specific about the type of consulting I choose. It's, very contained hourly, chats on a topic. It's not going to blow up into some lengthy project that I'm going to have to decline because I don't want to do that. Yeah. But I love that idea. When thinking about, true passive income generation, some body of work is done. And maybe there's some upkeep over time, but maybe not. Some body of work is done. And then there's a product, digital or otherwise, right? Digital maybe is the easiest model that has a life of its own at that point. People are able to acquire it or subscribe to it or somehow engage with that material that you spent some time on, 4 or 5 hours in your example of the brush set. And then from then on, they can just purchase it. You're not doing anything additional to it necessarily. It just exists. Do I have that right?
Yeah. And depending on the product, so that's an example of a real low touch product. There are products as you get higher and higher up. So I sell some products for $1,000, right? Like a training course that has some consulting associated with it. Okay. Selling something like that has a different level of touch, but the value exchange there is much, much different. And I think the sales process on those tends to be a little heavier upfront, but then the person who buys that $1,000 product is just a much better customer than the one who's buying a $10 thing, like a $10 paper cutting, which is not actually passive. And they get it and they're like, oh, the paper is kind of bent at the corner. It's like, oh my God. Yeah. But you know what I mean? I think, I do. I'd like to hear what so you kind of rationalized, you traded a little time to buy the drone. And then you rationalize that you could use it as a passive income generator. How so?
I would say as potential. I don't think that's necessarily a big one for me. Number one, I need to learn, and I am spending time learning, to become a better videographer, right? I think one passive income generation idea I've certainly seen in that space is stock footage,
Yeah,
right? Making your and you've probably done some of that, I
I
suspect,
have.
given how
Yeah.
long you've been in drones.
Yep.
But making, still photos, aerial photos and aerial videos available for purchase or license on any of the various exchanges that are out there. That's this one simple
Yeah.
idea.
And you're actually you're taking the Part 107 exam, right, to become a licensed operator?
Yeah, absolutely. Since, to do commercial work with drones, that's, to my understanding, is required. So yeah, that's an example of something I am doing just to build some skills.
Yeah. So like it kind of builds out this stable. It's one way that I've also used passive income to build a skill set. Because when I first had the business working active services, that's a certain set of skills that you use to serve clients, but it's an entirely different one to try and market a product or create a video, that's going to have ads shown on it, or
Right.
edit footage for, black box to, get royalties from, stock footage. And I think it's interesting that you've kind of brushed up against that so early here, because it's a great way to kind of find new interests. And for someone who is now not working, for not trading your time for dollars as you were previously, what is there that need to kind of seek out a vocation, or, like, does passive income kind of fill this inherent need to feel useful, or does it fill a part of the job, aspect? I mean, I'm curious about that, because I look at myself walking into FI and saying, how am I going to feel here? Am I going to feel like I'm without a job?
I think it's a few different things. It's a very, very good question. And it's not something I would say I sit and actively think about. But I mean, I like the idea of, spending my time doing things that are of interest to me, maybe things that I always wanted to spend time learning more about, or just came to stumbling around, looking at ideas, right? Having this time to organically come to concepts that seem interesting. And I think that for me, in some a way in which you and I think are very similar is, having sort of an entrepreneurial mindset of, well, if this is interesting to me, maybe I can turn it into something that will generate some revenue. Maybe it's a small amount, maybe it's not. Who cares? At the very least, any income that's generated will reduce my need to withdraw money, even according to my plan, right? Because I have a plan. I pay myself once a month from my money market account. That's all budgeted for. But if I can withdraw less, that's great, right? That only de-risks this whole FIRE idea, or allows me to, sock away some money in the, ultra vacation fund, right? For some crazy trip we may come up with down the road, or, allows me to make a charitable gift, whatever it is. I just like that idea of, that kind of, it's like a double dip, right? You're doing something that's super fun for you and fulfilling, and may also generate income.
And you're learning skills, and also,
yeah, exactly. And I didn't even say that, but I am, and that for me, like at the core, I guess, to be honest, is always about one of the biggest things. Like for me, like learning and growing and building a set of skills is to me so fulfilling. Like I was saying to Lori, my wife, doing the Part 107 exam for commercial drone pilot, even if I never earn a dime with that thing, like just learning that information.
It's so cool. Yeah.
It's so cool. Like, I mean, reading those sectional maps.
I want those, dude. Where can you buy those sectional charts? Like, I want that for like a huge poster.
I had said the same thing. I was looking at my area of California. I just can't believe how much is packed into those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just remarkable. So yeah. Look sectional charts if you want to see what we're talking about.
If it's interesting to me that you landed in this place. I mean, we are very similar here. The thing that I have discovered over many years of creating passive income earning products is those things which I have created just out of following my own curiosities, and I've absolutely removed all pressure of having to earn income from.
Yeah.
Those are the things that have been most successful. And it's all been,
really?
Yeah. And it's all just been around this idea that I'm seeking out knowledge and information, And when I discover it, I find a certain formula for how I learned that skill, and I'm just going to share it, and whether that is in, the shortcut to, Procreate pack, you can sort of draw blueprints by hand sketch blueprints, or if it's something like building a business, that's another kind of information product that I have, like a course on how to do it, what it is that I figured out how to do with this business, and
Right.
It's just that process from, not knowing to knowing. That's so exciting to me. And all I do is kind of take that transformation and package it up as a thing. And that's the product. But I never started with the intent of, creating this thing. It was just, I'm going to check this out and I'm going to follow where my interests lead me. And if something great comes out of it, cool. And it sounds like that's exactly where you're at, because now when you were starting to talk about like taking the Part 107 exam, I was like, oh geez, I mean, you could actually do a quick little video series on how you took that and how you studied and
Sure.
There's lots of different ways to just take everything that you're doing right now, and by openly sharing it, to turn it into something.
What are the lessons you learned, the biggest mistake or, thing you would guide people to not do? I mean, every situation's different, but there must be some key lessons in there.